Radio. Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
To shell out so much money for fees that um the the notion of them becoming like a functional bank, it was completely unrealistic to make that kind of shift. So him putting that out there was just yet again another Elon pump and dump, or an attempt at one at that. In terms of like, I don't know if it actually helped the
He's still
Twitter
being
stock.
sued for like all sorts of things, right? Like he's still in
Oh,
trouble
yeah,
for soliciting a flight attendant, and he's still in trouble with the SEC for like I think like 3 or 4 other things still, right? And these are all still
Yeah.
happening.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's like apparently
And he just lost $25 billion.
whenever they wanted to change the name of or he wanted to change the name of PayPal to Tesla or to X Corp. And the other people in the organization were like, that doesn't mean anything. That is not what we do. The name X Corp is dumb. It doesn't mean anything. So he's been wanting to do this for a very long time. And now that he's in a position for nobody to tell him no, that's why he has made this X Corp shift. I mean, among other possible reasons in terms of like, if he thinks that changing the name to X Corp will get them out of contracts that Twitter had signed or Twitter had gone into. It's like he's making all these terrible business decisions. Like when he tried to fire the guy with multiple sclerosis for not coming into the office, and then basically created a huge potential lawsuit for the company because he fired somebody explicitly over their health issues, when that's like on its own something that is not legal. But then when he did it so publicly, it was like there was no way for him to go back on the notion that what he had done was because of this person's handicap. And what made it worse, well, funnier, was that the guy had been literally voted like Iceland's person of the year or something because he was like taking funds, and I think he was helping make buildings more accessible by helping build ramps or something. It was like something amazingly philanthropic, and he got an award for it. But then Elon comes along and tries to like fire this dude because he's not actually physically able to come into the Twitter office.
Oh, Elon's just jealous that here's this guy who's in a wheelchair who's getting nationally recognized for doing something great, and Elon's just kind of pissing off.
Well, he didn't know. Well, that was the thing. He didn't know who this guy was when he fired him publicly, or attempted to fire him publicly, and then once everything started coming out about like why the guy couldn't actually go into the office and how this guy was like, that's what it was. He didn't need the job. This is what made it even more hilarious. He didn't need the job. He had built some software that Twitter had acquired from him,
like integrated into their platform somehow, right?
Integrated into their platform, and he took a job to go with it as a benefit in terms of like he could have negotiated any sort of a variety of situations, but the one he took was to work with Twitter because his software was such a necessity in their platform, but he also wanted to be part of developing. And this is where that happened under the previous leadership, and Elon had no idea what had transpired. So then he comes in, just tries to fire this guy, and basically creates another legal problem.
So he just like created a spreadsheet, did a database query on attendance, and so I was like, oh, this person's only been in the office like 0.002 hours in the last year. I'm just gonna fire them. Oh, that's like the worst kind of management. That's not even management. That's truncating or
yeah, it's looking at an organization on the books and treating it as if everything operates as if it is a book, and as if the people in it are automatons that have no individual identities or individual nuances. That it's like he tried to come in and surgically remove what he thought was unnecessary within the Twitter organization to make it more lean, but he ended up just basically chopping off limbs, not knowing what he was doing. And it was like what turned into what was intended to be surgically precise turned out to be a brute force laceration of clearly important elements of the organization in a way that if there was any semblance of this man being intelligent, it's almost all completely gone out of the window because of the way he's handled Twitter, and because Twitter is such a public forum that he refuses to stop posting on. It's like impossible to look at him as an intelligent person for most people anymore, except the absolute fanboys of the fanboys that are left. And it's like, I saw this coming. I didn't think it would happen this fast, but in terms of like, eventually everybody gets sick of some, like, an individual over time if you are exposed to that individual too much. And it's like, in buying Twitter and effectively putting himself in everyone's feed to try to make everyone like him, it exacerbated and accelerated his pending dislike. And I don't think he thought it would happen because of narcissism, but also because of money. And when people around a person stop being honest with them, it's really easy for that person to get wrapped up in their own little bubble. And it seems like nobody has been honest with him for a very long time, at least to his face, because then the ones that did get fired, because he doesn't, it's been so long that now when somebody that is his subordinate is honest with them, he just fires them because he's used to people not doing that. And it's clear to the rest of the world because he did it with Twitter, but that's no way to run a business. And it's obvious that his management style, especially knowing that there were Tesla whistleblowers who were trying to warn people about the over-the-air updates being pushed through a single source as a point of major security risk. And also those over-the-air updates being vulnerable to a hack in terms of if somebody was able to push a malicious update, it would go to all of the cars that are connected at the same time. So that's where, as long as Tesla is deploying the updates the way they were, it was such a major security risk that anybody who even brought it up basically got pushed out of the organization. So knowing that happened, seeing him operate so publicly, I think everyone has lost faith in him in terms of, when you operate behind closed doors, it's still enigmatic and it can still be framed as this guy who's smarter than everybody else because we don't actually know what he's doing. Now, when he walks into the fucking Twitter headquarters the first day carrying a sink, trying to make a joke, and it's so public, and the whole thing has been public, nobody can continue to have faith in this guy's intelligence. And he did it to himself. It's like there is a benefit to having mystery in terms of the more people get exposed to something, the less mystery there is associated with that thing. He tweets so much, he's on Twitter so much, that any sort of mystery about his personality is gone because we're seemingly exposed to him all the time. And unless he completely changes his personality when he's not on Twitter, we're seeing his entire personality. And it's a very shallow and a very childish and immature personality, but also knowing that he's on Twitter so much, I think it makes it more difficult for people to imagine some super genius doing equations and figuring out how to put rockets into orbit and back down on Earth because this person's on Twitter all the fucking time, so he can't be doing that. And I think again, it's like when you had Iron Man 2 and you had Elon as this guy who as a real person is advising a fictional genius. When we're at that phase of Elon, it's a lot easier for him to say ridiculous things and then people give him the benefit of the doubt as if it's like, oh, he's just an eccentric genius. We can't possibly understand. But now all the tweets are adding up and it's like no longer are people thinking when they see that shit, he's an eccentric genius. It's like, oh, this is a rich daddy's boy who never learned no and never had enough people be honest with him. And that's exactly what it looks like. It was always that. We just gave him the benefit of the doubt because we didn't have enough information. But now we have enough information.
So I'm looking at the source code that was available on GitHub about Twitter, and apparently, author is Elon, author is power user, author is Democrat, author is Republican, and this is baked into the source code of Twitter, and it foists his account onto everyone's, I don't know what to call it, bird feeder. Is that what it is? What Twitter space? And of course he acts like, well, I don't know why it's there.
Well, and it's like, okay, is the source code on GitHub?
Yes, that was the stuff was released on GitHub.
Which it's like, okay, there's multiple Elon Musk GitHub pages. But yeah, this is like one of those things where he's trying to make himself look more involved in something that he didn't actually do than he was. This is yet again him inserting himself as if he has anything to do with the Twitter source code.
It's Twitter, the algorithm. Oh, God. 224 lines down it starts. It's like the end of it all. I suppose this is some kind of the default for what it applies to a profile, and over time it builds upon this over the course of interaction with whatever their system is trying to feed people.
Well, what I was going to get at is GitHub is great in terms of like showing someone's history. And it's like, I don't know if these Elon profiles are real or not, but he doesn't have a GitHub history. And it's like, you look at somebody like Vitalik Buterin and his GitHub is so active, even though the dude's a fucking billionaire. It's like, yeah, if somebody knows how to code, being rich isn't going to stop them from coding. I'm not saying Elon doesn't know how to code. I'm saying I think he's been pretending engineer and playing engineer for a lot longer than he was ever actually an engineer in terms of.
I mean, like when I look at this, the way this algorithm is written, the portion authors Elon, authors all that stuff. It looks like it was written by somebody else.
I mean, it had to be. There's no way he wrote any source code, which is like...
I mean, it doesn't look like it was written by the person that created this initial algorithm or even like added to it in a meaningful way. It looks like it was copied from something and just slammed in there. Whatever.
Yeah, and that's where, again, it's like the way he's acquiring projects as if once he acquires them, it's like he created them. That's been his modus operandi from the beginning. A lot of people don't realize that he's not creating this stuff because of the way he acquires and then puts himself as if he's the creator.
And he should have called his company Edison. That would have been so much more accurate. That's so Edison-like to steal the name Tesla too.
Yeah. Which again, he's definitely much more in line with Edison than Tesla. So I think in terms of, well, I don't think he even came up with that name. So that's where it's like, you know what I mean?
You know what I want to know is, okay, so he's got X Corp and he's going to have X AI. Does he refer to his house as the X Mansion? Does he refer to his private jet as the X Jet? Are his like executives X-Men? Is this where
he didn't
change his name Charles Xavier? Like, it's so weird.
He did not come up with the Tesla name.
Why can't he come up with an original name for his robot? Why do you have to call it Optimus? Like, there are all these fucking questions that I've got. It's like, can this guy come up with like an original name for any of this shit? Because, oh man. It's just like kind of painful now that I think about it. It's like, why is all these things just... It sounds like somebody else came up with this shit. And I mean, we know that somebody else came up with everything, of course, but why do you have to come up with such I don't know, it's like he's piggybacking the names off of other things that are actually cool. I bet SpaceX was like imagined in some anime, like originally.
Well, and there is an X Corp in the actual X-Men universe. So that's where I'm like, I wonder if he's going to end up getting sued over that.
Oh, I hope so.
I hope he does, because that's where
Disney is ruthless with their properties.
Yeah, it'd be different if Disney didn't own that shit now. But that would be pretty funny if after all that he changes the name and then Disney sues him to make him go back to Twitter.
Oh man. Poor guy.
Well, and the idea to have all of these businesses under one corporate entity is self-defeating in terms of, if you have an electric car company that's meant to try to make the environment better, having a rocket company, it basically negates that. So the idea that, like, on the one hand, yeah, we're electric cars, but on the other hand, we're burning a bunch of rocket fuel, literal rocket fuel. It's the most incongruous existence in terms of one side is definitely polluting massively and the other side is claiming to be anti-pollution in terms of, like, the premise of the electric vehicle is not 100% about pollution, but a lot of it is. So that's where this single man heading both of these completely incongruous initiatives didn't seem as bad 5 years ago, but now that he's messing up so publicly, I wonder if he's going to get pushed out of one of the roles. Like, I'd imagine it'd probably be SpaceX before Tesla, in terms of like, because SpaceX was a more recent acquisition than Tesla. It's not that they'll have more ownership, but the identity of the organization is less tied to any other individual, in terms of like, there's no second in command at SpaceX in terms of like the public face. It's only Elon. Elon's the only face of Tesla. Nobody could, without Googling it, nobody can name a second person at Tesla that's of importance. In terms of like, unless you're talking about like Kimball Musk, and I don't even know if he actually works at Tesla. It would be a guess. But anybody who was like, oh yeah, I know the vice president's name. Well, you probably fucking have worked with them. Without Googling that shit, nobody knows anybody in these organizations beyond Elon. And that's by his design.
Holy crap. I just Googled it, and it's not even easy to find. There's like a leadership team, but that's not the actual ownership team.
Yeah. Which is where, like, okay, with Twitter, they have a lot of the ownership that was made public.
Crap. So the number 2 in Tesla's name is Zhu Xiaotong. He goes by Tom Zhu. He is in charge of Tesla Shanghai Gigafactory.
I bet nobody has heard of that dude except his family and friends and people in Shanghai who watch news about auto production. As influential as that dude is,
I had to think about how to say his name. Seriously, that was when I was like, wait a second, I can say this, but still, that's not something that I say ever. I don't string those vocables together very often. Tell you what.
Well, and it doesn't sound like that big of a deal.
No.
Until you think about sports teams, and if you go to like somebody who's really into football, they'll be able to tell you the name of their favorite team's offensive and probably defensive coordinator, let alone the fucking head coach, let alone the general manager, let alone the head of PR. They'll probably be able to name like at least 5 to 10 management people within the organization. They're not even playing football, in terms of like, again, whenever I was like into the Colts and like watching football, you know so much about so much of the management in terms of like what's going on with the team, because you want to know like the history or how good their offensive coordinator is with this specific formation, or there's a lot of things that you can benefit from in terms of like learning more about the management and not just the players. But that is not, it's not the equivalent in industry.
I found the corporate governance webpage. It's ir.tesla.com/corporate, and which provides links to all of the 4 members on the leadership team, and then the 8 on the board of directors, and then all sorts of documents. So it exists. There's a list of all of their committees. So it exists. It's just not obvious, and
Well, and what I'm getting at is it's not a cultural thing in terms of like the the way that corporations are presented. You get a figurehead, and anything beyond that figurehead detracts from um, that figurehead's capacity to make it seem like they are the ones in absolute control. So even with like Steve Jobs, you know like Tim Cook or Steve Wozniak, and there was like a few people that you may have known partially because of the way things played out. So it was like impossible for Jobs to only be the name. But even like once you get to that it's like nobody knows anything beyond those people. It's like there is a level of making it seem like every person beyond that level is subject to the whims of the person at the top, the person making all the decisions. So in that case, then it seems like everything that comes out of that organization is the brainchild of the figurehead. And it does a good job of creating the appearance of corporate culture in terms of a unilateral movement because the figurehead seems to be the one making all the decisions. And that's where, from the consumer side, I think there was like a short-term benefit that is now being outweighed by the long-term detriment of not being able to articulate what is good and bad because all people know is the figurehead. And in terms of like Google, for example, the only time you find out about anybody's name at Google is when they're on the way out of the organization, or if they've blown a whistle or raised a flag or something. So this is where it's like some organizations in the corporate world go so far out of their way to like occlude the actual humans that operate them that they don't even necessarily have figureheads. And the difference, I think, in terms of like the figurehead versus the lack of a figurehead is when you don't have a figurehead, you can like almost disappear into the background, like Acer or Lenovo. Who's the head of Acer? Who's the head of Lenovo? Nobody fucking knows. Nobody fucking cares. Who's the head of Dell?
It's not Michael Dell.
Nobody fucking cares.
Let's see who's
Nobody
the head
fucking
of Dell.
cares. And it's not to say that those companies aren't good or aren't.
Oh no, it looks like he still is.
Well,
good for him then.
Good for him. And it's even funnier in terms of like assuming it wasn't him because he's not making himself the figurehead. It's like that's like almost a perfect example of the opposite approach.
I mean, the CEO of HP has only been there since 2019. Michael Dell's
I know
been
at one
there
point it
since
was like Carly
2007.
Fiorina, right? Because she was like making that a point of her being able to lead. That's like the only person I could say, and it had nothing to do with while she was actually there. It was only because of a political campaign. But yeah, there's like multiple big major companies that, because they don't go the figurehead route, it's like you could guess and you might get some right, but you don't know. And that's what I mean. Like, we know fucking Zuckerberg. We know the company he heads, whether it's changed its name or not. We know he's at the head of it. And then it's even further. It's like he's heading Oculus. Could you name the person that was the head of Oculus before him?
No.
And again, Oculus was one of the biggest VR headset producers on the planet, but nobody knew who the fuck their leader was. And again, so it, to me, there is this notion of the people who go the figurehead route think that because they had some success with it, that they can keep reproducing it. And the market goes with them for a while, and it works for a while, but that is a novel
seems like a
approach.
Live by the sword, die by the sword kind of way.
It is. And they don't think that they will die by the sword because it worked for them for so long that they've become detached from reality and don't think they can lose. That's the big issue, is like, if you win for so long and don't remember what it's like to lose, it actually can start to make a person think that they are incapable of losing anymore. And you see this over and over with fucking Tim Cook, Zuckerberg, Elon. Just go down any list of people who made it and made a bunch of money. At some point, they stop making good decisions. Like, not to say that they won't have successes, but like, okay, Drake, he's not a corporate person, but dude bets a lot of money on poor choices, which is like, sometimes he wins, sometimes he loses, but now he's making all of these public bad decisions because he's just got too much money, in a way where once you get this certain state, it's like, oh, it doesn't matter if he loses $1 million or not. And that mindset is fucking horrible. Like, the idea that somebody can bet $1 million on something frivolously, even though they may have $100 million or $1 billion, losing $1 million on a bet is such a just poor existence that the people who get to that level and do the stuff that poor people can only dream of, like, the idea of losing $1 million on a single bet is more money than most people will ever have in their entire lives. So for a person to just throw it away, it's actually such a horrible, horrible decision that because he didn't become poor from that, him and other people are able to justify it because it's not actually a make or break thing for them, but it's still a bad decision. And I think that's where, again, once rich people get into a place where a bad decision doesn't make them poor people start giving them the benefit of the doubt on things that they shouldn't, because our society makes it seem like you must have done something right if you're rich. Like, you must know something that other people don't know. And that gap of information gets exploited by people like Elon. And he's able to benefit of the doubt himself all the way to where he is now. But now that benefit of the doubt is running out, we'll see how far he can actually fall. Because I think those people assume that they can't go to zero. Like, once you have so many commas and so many like digits, those people, like I said, those people assume that they'll never see zero. And it may not necessarily be like, he's overdrafting his account or anything like that. But what I'm saying is, Elon was at one point the richest man in the world on paper, and that's not true anymore. So his descent has already started, and it's it wasn't actually about someone else ascending beyond him, because the person that took him over, nobody could fucking name that guy without looking it up.
I think it's like the number 2 guy or number 3 guy at Tesla.
I mean, maybe, but that doesn't even make fucking sense. That doesn't even make any fucking sense. Like, how is the number 3 guy richer than the number 1 guy?
Because he didn't lose a bunch
of course,
of money buying
but
Twitter.
I mean, but that's where, again, that doesn't make any fucking sense. And that those number games are so close to like falling apart, which is where seeing the frauds that got exposed in the last few years, they think it's impossible for them to actually get in trouble or get called out. But once so many rich people also get burned, that's when.
Nope, it's Bernard Arnault. He's the overseer of the Louis Vuitton empire.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
He owns Tiffany and Co.
That makes that still doesn't make a ton of sense necessarily, because Louis Vuitton is very passé. They're definitely past their prime. I'm sure.
I'm just reading off the list of stuff that.
No. I mean, I'm just saying. I'm sure old rich people and non hip rich people are still wearing Louis Vuitton, but like Louis Vuitton ain't been popular since that second Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift movie. Like really popular. Like people ain't putting Louis Vuitton on their cars and shit anymore. Like there was peak Louis Vuitton, and we're definitely past that too. But one of the things is they move in the exact opposite way as an organization than Tesla. So I know for a fact that Louis Vuitton was like heavy into the blockchain experimentation, in terms of like they were looking at ways to leverage blockchain to ensure the uniqueness of Louis Vuitton items, like 5 or 6 years ago. So, and in terms of like the actual executives, it was like high level people going into like crypto conventions and blockchain conventions and actually doing their research on the ground. So like I've seen the Louis Vuitton people, I've seen the Wells Fargo people. They move different in a way that, again, not to say that they're the guys number 1 because their brand is popular, but they're making better business decisions that aren't so publicly visible and aren't so readily accessible, that there is an air of mystery around it. But it's also because they're not transparent, and that's like, on the one hand, it's not great for shareholders. Like they have to have their shareholder quarterly reports and everything. So there's a level of transparency that's happening. But I can't get on Twitter and find out what the fuck that guy's thinking right now. But I can do that for Elon. And I think that's not a lot of people are going to the extreme that Elon is going. I feel like there's a scale. Elon's at the far end of the publicly available narcissist leader that puts themselves at the center of every organization that they run. And then at the opposite end, you have the Louis Vuittons, the Lenovo's, the Acers, the Dells, where they have successful integration into the market, but I couldn't pick Michael Dell out of a fucking lineup. I see, like, I could Google it, obviously. But if somebody was like, if they put 6 people in front of me right now, I would not be able to be sure which one is Michael Dell. And that speaks volumes to his presence in terms of, or his lack of presence in terms of a public persona, but also Dell's brand identity was heavily associated with the dude you're getting a Dell guy. And then once they realized they couldn't depend on a single entity forever, that dude basically disappeared. And then it became ubiquitous Dell in the background. You'd see Dell used in TV shows. You'd see Dell in your local computer labs. But there was no more dude, you're getting a Dell guy. And Michael Dell didn't replace him as a figurehead.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I remember the dude, are you getting a Dell commercial campaign quite vividly, because it was when I was first going to IU. That was like all over the TV. He was all over the airwaves. And then every computer lab had Dell computers. And then over the years, as I worked on numerous, Compaq doesn't exist anymore. They got absorbed into, I think, HP. But every model of computer or laptop, desktop, whatever that was mainstream, I'd probably put my hands on at one point. And the ones that I saw the least were all Dells, except during that period of time when every computer was running stupid hot. But I blame Intel for that. They make really good computers. When I think about it, it's like all of my computers that I use right now are Dell computers. So apparently I've been brainwashed by the marketing as well.
Well, it was like
my experience with them has been almost universally positive. However, so
there's a period when they acquired HP that their laptop cases were not good, but they've gotten over that and it's not as bad anymore. So like one of my computers is a Dell, and it was like, fuck, I think they make Alienware computers now too, or they acquired Alienware.
Yeah.
So like,
I think it was Alienware that they acquired. HP got sold to, I think, a Chinese company or a Korean company, maybe a Japanese company. I don't remember.
I mean, eventually, but I thought that I thought that they were like together at one point at least, because I thought that was like, or maybe they were being made in the same factory or something, because it was like Dell and HP had the same laptop cases.
Yeah. Well, there was this really bizarre period of time when the industry was trying to adopt a new form factor for desktops. They tried to use this BTX form factor that was designed around cooling, and all it did was make things complex and difficult for the computer builder who wants to use, more than just 2 PCI slots, because one of the other PCI slots is so close that it prevents the use of other PCI slots. But more to the point, there was a period of time there, I think, when every laptop seemed to have a motherboard made by either Asus or DFI or MSI, and this was before like Asus and MSI started making their own computers. But I think you're right. I think they were all coming out of the same fact, like laptop bezel town China and motherboard town China, motherboard city. It's like, an hour north of Shanghai or something like that. But also, if I think they were smart. Like Dell started making computers with magnesium chassis. And if one spends enough money to get one of those, you can pick them up by the corner and not worry about bending the whole thing and corrupting your video card or your power inverter. I actually had a Dell, I think it was a 17R. It was just a giant. but it was so flimsy. I think that when I finally gave up on it, it was one of those times where I realized that the only way that it was reliable was when it was sitting on a lap desk, like a bamboo plate, essentially.
Yeah, that's where a lot of the heat diffusion was like the issue in terms of like the cases. And it's like you could, if you have to buy something else to make like your case work, that is
so bad.
Yeah, that's terrible. And it seemed like it became normalized that if you got a laptop, you'd have to get like a fan or a case or like an extra stand.
But that was across like the entire laptop market. They were all like that for like 3 or 4 years. Like even Apple's computers were like, could cook breakfast on them practically. Like I had an early i7 MacBook Pro, and that thing got so hot I had to get an elevated stand so I could put a fan underneath it.
Yeah, and that's where like I have to use an elevated stand, but it's also because it's a gaming laptop. So you can't anticipate a gaming laptop is going to stay cool.
Your gaming laptop has more video card than my workstation.
Right, yeah, in terms of like when the laptop is able to process more than most desktops, it's like you can't also expect that it's going to stay cool. That's just unreasonable.
I mean, my workstation is a I think it requires like 4 rack units if I want to actually rack it, and then it's pretty deep, and it has a full size cooling solution, so it can be quiet. But squeezing that down into, I don't know how thick your laptop is. Like I'm going to say it's a bit over 1/2 of an inch, but less than 3/4 of an inch, and to expect that to stay as cool as a full size cooling solution is just not that's not reasonable. That's a unreasonable expectation. But at the same time, packing that much power into something that you can travel with is actually very, very cool. I think as mainstream computing moves entirely into like the USB-C format for IO type situation, it'll make a lot of things much easier. The last 20 years of having I think there's like 3 different FireWire standards, like the 1394 A, B, and 800. There was like 2 400 formats, and then there's an 800 megabit per second format, and then like the various formats for Thunderbolt, which is ridiculous because one of them utilizes the USB-C format, and then all of the variations of USB with like the rectangular end, and not all of those are created equally. But once everyone is fully embraced the USB-C format, I think things will actually stabilize quite a bit. And we're really close to it.
I just like a USB that you can't plug in wrong.
I really like that.
That's, the biggest benefit to me.
The thing that I like the most is that some of these like really super modern, really advanced only have USB-C laptops. Every USB-C port can also deliver power to the laptop from the wall wart or the transformer. Like that's actually quite incredible. Like I've had to tell people so many times, like, no, I can't fix your laptop because I can't rekey this area to fit a new jack in there because, they dropped it off the side of their bed or something. That's one of those, like, yeah, this thing's, I can create a dog leg for it, but it's going to be like not a mobile computer for the rest of its life. No one wants to hear that. But if you can just like plug it into a different USB-C port and you're back in action, that's great. That's like that's like in case shit that you don't have to pay extra for.
I'm also starting to wonder if like everything peaked in 2019. Because hear me out. So like I think the last time I got a laptop was in 2019, and then I got a cell phone in 2019. And it's like the laptop definitely is not perfect, and there's some issues with it. But as far as like the development, all I've seen is the GPUs basically getting more powerful, which it translates into like lower battery times. So it's like there's this element of if I'm trying to play a game on a laptop, I don't necessarily need it to be the highest resolution because it's already on my laptop screen, unless I'm hooking it up to an external monitor, which in that case, I just use my desktop. So on the one hand, like the notion of a laptop with the biggest GPU, it sounds cool, but in an application, there's not really many actual uses for that thing in terms of like it's overpowered. And I think there's this element of when you start overpowering things, it actually makes them less useful, even down to like if you have uh, a mechanical screwdriver, fucking sometimes you can't use it because it goes too fast, too quick, and then you just have to use a manual. And in the way that like having an overpowered computer ends up putting a person in a situation where if the computer's overpowered, you're wasting electricity and you're also overpaying for something that doesn't need to be there for you to accomplish what you need to do. And that's where if you look at the sales, not many people are buying those overpowered laptops. So it's like it's just because something can be made doesn't mean that the market's going to accept it. And further, there is a point where the market doesn't, it starts to reject things even if it's an improvement or even if it's more powerful than the previous iteration. And I think that's where, like, since 2019, there hasn't been a lot of power improvements that I've seen actually be taken up by consumers.
So my 1660 card was released in 2019, but it's sitting in a workstation that was released in like 2012. And it's so that computer has, 16 cores and 32 gigabytes of RAM, and it's a barnstormer. But I don't see any need to upgrade anything about it because the most I ever consume CPU wise, like when I'm rendering usually consumes the whole thing, but I can't do anything else. When you're rendering, it's kind of eats it all up. But, making music, running plugins, running synthesizers, I'll get up to like 30, 40%. And then I'm pretty content with what I've been working on. That's a lot of CPU consumption. And mostly I have that video card so I can run multiple monitors, not to play video games. And so for me, it's like the GPU is definitely overkill, but the system itself is just rock solid. And then, so the system that we use for our broadcast is more modern. It has a CPU released in 2018, and it has onboard Intel graphics. I think it's like Optima or Iris or something like that. And it only has 12 cores, but it does everything that we need in a scaled down version from what was developed on the workstation. It does it all. And, it's only a few years younger. It's only 6 years younger, but it functions at a similar level. And you'd think that I would be like the market for, the high-powered workstation laptop. But when it comes down to it, they've always been like I/O limited. There's only so many USB ports. You can't really expand any of it. You might be able to get away with using some kind of dock, maybe if it's designed for that. But that's just another peripheral that you've got to manage cables for. And eventually it's nice to be able to like plug a lot of things in if you need to. And then you're limited to you're not limited to it. You don't have to use the monitor that's built in. You don't have to use the keyboard that's built in. You can actually just set it up so that you can close the lid and put it on a shelf if you really want to get it out of the way and just treat it like a desktop. But for whatever reason, every time I've tried those kinds of configurations, there was always this thing that I had to create space for that wasn't really being used because I was just using it like a desktop. And at the time, I could never get those docks to work right. Like they just weren't designed for what I was trying to accomplish with them. And there was an era when laptops had like PCMCIA card slots to do expansion, but those things were really kind of haphazard. You're dealing with, a bank of pins at the end of a trough that's like the size of a credit card.
Well, and at a certain point, it's like,
you're going to carry around so much stuff, you might as well just have a desktop that you put in that you just carry around.
Or just use your cell phone in terms of like, there's so much capacity in cell phones that like a laptop can be matched for a lot of things that need mobility. Cell phones can match laptops on a lot of things now, whereas like the capacity for mobility is great, but when you have special needs for a specific situation, a laptop may be too
much.
Yeah, and that's where it's like, in a lot of cases, the CPU and GPU in the cell phone is like enough to do what is necessary for something that's like not in a specific or like needs to be mobile.
It's very true. Like there are times when a computer is completely overkill for configuring a piece of hardware. When a laptop, and any kind of computer, but a tablet or a phone is more than sufficient, and it does it perfectly and quickly, and there's almost zero configuration. Whereas with computers, you always end up having to configure something, even if there's a wizard that's supposed to configure for you. Somehow, magically, mobile software engineers have figured out, it's like, oh yeah, let's just look for one thing. Like, I think it's called restricting the hardware compatibility list. Like some devices can only work with, or some software only works with one device, one type of hardware, or a range of hardware. And it makes it a lot easier. There's no driver tuning. There's none of that. It's actually quite brilliant.
Which again, that's where I'm like, I don't know how much more tech can get released. Like I said, I feel like in 2019 we hit the peak of like tech development in tandem with utility, and it's like anything after that was like over engineered. Not to say that nothing new has come out, but again, it's like over engineering has plagued a lot of new developments.
So the most advanced, well, no, not necessarily most advanced. One of the most advanced audio interfaces that I possess is, and my main brain for my recording system was released in 2014, and I have a previous edition of it that was released like 2 years before that. And then I have a guitar processor. These things aren't all new. I think the guitar thing was made in 2018. A lot of this stuff, the technology isn't new. It's just being packaged in a way that can interface with modern computers. Minor improvements to the way software works. Minor interfaces to the human interface. But a lot of this stuff is, they're trimming at the fringes to make minor improvements. Minor, very minimal improvements. And then I guess conversely, the biggest improvement is that the cost comes down, because now it's possible to buy an audio interface with world-class conversion for $1,000, where in maybe 10 years ago it would cost anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 for just 2 channels instead of 28 channels in. So it's a complicated analysis, but you're right, the technology itself hasn't really changed that much. It's really the costs that came down, but even then, with the chip crisis and the supply chain crunch, a lot of these devices aren't available. They aren't manufacturing any of this stuff right now because can't get the parts. And it's the same thing with the auto industry. There are a lot of car lines that have been shut down because they don't have components to build them.
Yeah, that's a huge problem.
Still, we're supposed to be out of pandemic by a year. Everything's supposed to be back to normal. People are acting like everything's fine, I think the fire curtain is down, and but people think it's just the intermission, so they don't realize that this backstage area is still burning. It's just burning in a different way. How much longer do you think this can last? The bells and whistles phase of computing before people just stop buying it.
Well, I feel like it's gonna end really soon. In looking for jobs, I started seeing ChatGPT pop up in job requirements in terms of people or organizations looking for familiarity or expertise with ChatGPT modeling. And I'm like, okay, this phase is not going to last long, but this is also the phase where shit falls off the cliff in terms of if they're trying to actively integrate this at large scale in, any organization, that is an indicator that multiple organizations are going to try it. And that's where I feel like capitalism is about to have to prove itself and prove why it's it's going to have to prove why it needs to keep existing. And what I mean is, when you have organizations that are effectively capitalists looking to integrate AI, what are they doing? So in the short term, it looks like they're trying to reduce costs and increase productivity. But for who? Well, in most cases, it's going to be the shareholder. So if the shareholder is the beneficiary of the implementation of AI into an organization, and that's the main benefactor, it's only going to be a small percentage of shareholders, and for only a short amount of time, that actually benefit from implementing AI at scale. And not to say that AI can't make things more efficient in some cases or make things smoother. It's that the way that it's trying to be implemented is almost explicitly to reduce costs and increase output. And when it's in such a binary implementation, you get the Elon limb cutting that is meant to be precision surgery. And that's, I think, what's about to happen with this AI movement, which is where it's like, that's going to end the bells and whistles phase almost immediately. And then we're going to have to move to the what's actually necessary phase, which we should have been there and we should have stayed there. But I don't know if we've ever actually been in a what's necessary phase. It seems like we've been in what's possible phases or what we can get away with phases, but I don't know if we've ever had a what's necessary phase of development. And I think that's where this seems to be headed in terms of like, yeah, they're going to try to implement AI in all sectors of the economy. But then once that phase is shown to not have any real benefactors other than shareholders, and that is not actually a net positive for society, I don't think that society in general will keep moving in that direction. Because part of it is like the people requesting the AI algorithms be built aren't the ones writing it. So there's only going to be so long that you can keep getting people to write these algorithms with the intent to cause downsizing at the behest of real people who don't have a solution to keep them alive. And it's like, if they implement universal basic income or something to prevent a few shareholders from holding the entire labor force hostage, then I do see a better possibility for AI to be implemented. But again, it's like, the economy is for people. The economy is for humans. It's not for just general output. And in terms of like, if we take this to the most extreme end, if let's say AI replaces every single human being that it possibly can, who's making the money? Why is there any money being made? Because why does AI need money? And then what do the people who got replaced have in form of support from a quote unquote government that was there with any reasonable expectation to protect those people? Because if the government is not protecting people from effectively being pushed to extinction because of AI, then that government is ineffective and doesn't really have any reason to exist. And they'll realize that. They'll realize that if they haven't already. So that's where I'm like, on the one hand, this feels very Black Mirror dystopian, like we're about to go into this phase of like AI taking everyone's job. But that scenario is actually really impossible. And I don't mean that, of course it's possible, but in terms of politicians who need humans to vote, because as far as I know, AI is not going to be allowed to vote. Until
AI can't be the copyright holder of its own creations.
No, it can't even call copyright, let alone vote. So until AI is given the right to vote and to vote in numbers that can compete against humans, the government is not going to take AI's side over its constituents. And they may appear to be doing such when it's not an actual voting, like a campaign period. But I guarantee once the campaign starts, you're going to hear a lot of shit about AI is not going to replace your job, or we're going to make sure AI is not going to replace your job. Whatever you do, if you're in the farm industry or working in pharmaceuticals or whatever, you're going to hear a bunch of politicians promising people that they're going to protect their jobs, even though the politicians can't. The politicians can't actually promise those things, but you're going to hear that. And that's where I mean, like, just logistically, because of the way that the government works, depending on human votes, they are not actually going to be able to let their human constituents be replaced by AI. And whether they've realized it yet or next voting cycle, it's definitely going to be something that makes it to the forefront of especially battleground states. I feel like battleground states, you're going to hear that way more as a topic of discussion than you would anticipate. Like people in Ohio and Pennsylvania, they're going to get bombarded with discussions about what to do about AI and if AI is going to take our jobs. And it's like, I wouldn't be surprised if Joe the plumber makes an appearance again. He's like, I guarantee you this Republican candidate is going to protect your plumbing jobs from the AI. And we're going to have like fucking plumbers on the right wing coming out against AI. And it's like, when we hit that part of this stage is like when I seriously feel like we're going to get out of the bells and whistles. And it's like, we're already in the phase of trying to determine what AI can't do and what the limits of AI are, so people feel more comfortable about their capacity to survive. But this is just the beginning, and we haven't even reached the Luddite stage yet of people who are actually under threat, like any sort of administrative position, like not the sanitation workers, but the administrators who decide where the sanitation workers go, not the bus drivers, but the administrators who decide where the bus drivers go. Not the city planners, but the administrators who decide how the city gets planned. They're going to try to replace those people because they know that they can't just flat out replace the physical people. So they'll start with the ones that are sitting at desks and doing mental jobs that they think that a computer can just come in and do because it's 85% accurate. Once they start figuring out where that 15% gap is, where they're wrong, that's when they're gonna have to go back to humans. And then it'll be hybrid. Well, the AI did so well until it gets to this point. Now we have to have a human operator watch it. And the AI does 85% of the work, but the human comes in 15% of the time and checks. Well, they'll go through that phase. And then they'll realize it's actually just easier to have a human there from the beginning. So there's this whole, like, because automation can never be 100% accurate, the notion of replacing a human with something that is not going to be 100% accurate it's only going to be possible when no lawsuits are on the line and no lives are on the line, which is actually a very slim, like, sliver of events. And think about this. Our flights are automated for like 90% of the duration of the flight. What parts aren't automated? The most dangerous. If a pilot is awake and functioning, the pilot lands the plane. The pilot takes off because they don't trust the artificial intelligence to do it. It could do it. An AI can land a plane. Machine learning can land a plane. It can take off. But because those are the most dangerous parts of the flight, that's why you have a pilot and a co-pilot to check on the AI and to do the things that they don't yet trust the AI to do, if they ever trust the AI to do it. So I can. Sorry, go ahead.
There was actually it was called Autoland, and they used this system. The FAA allowed airports, certain airports, to use Autoland systems, but in like 2022, that stopped, and largely due to the deployment of 5G communication technologies. Because it turns out that it interferes with the bandwidth that airports use to guide, auto landing. It's one of the reasons that it was like Asiana flight, whatever, from returning from Korea, hit the edge of the runway because they were too low. They thought they were higher up because the auto landing system was malfunctioning. So there were like about around 100 airports that allowed for this kind of these systems, and last year in 2022, those systems were disabled.
There you go.
It worked, but people want their extra potent Netflix stream on their phone at the airport. Fuck. I think that's one of the reasons that that automated driving is going to take a lot of extra effort. Is that people are going to demand even faster cellular data.
So automated landing has been around since 1965. That's fucking wild.
And
the very first automatic plane landing occurred in 1937.
So this is like, Jesus, that's like 80-year-old technology that finally died because people demand faster Netflix at the airport. Fully functional 80-year-old, mature 80-year-old technology that could land planes.
But even then, even when it was mature, it wasn't even that widely allowed.
No, it wasn't. Only at the international airports, it looks like.
Yeah.
The airports that would have the most advanced planes landing and taking off, because international airports fly over water. So that kind of makes sense why it wouldn't be widely adopted. It wouldn't be a common thing, but it's still pretty cool.
Oh yeah, it's cool as fuck. But again, this is where the capacity for a human to be taken out of the equation has been available for almost 100 years at this point. It's just that they just most often choose not to. Like, think about that. It's the capacity has been around so long, but they still choose not to.
So less than 1% of the U.S. population holds a private license for a private pilot license. No, just the certificate. That's just the first step in getting a license. So, yeah, we're not going to have people flying cars anytime soon.
No, I don't think that'll ever happen. And the issue is like, it's possible, but it's cars are dangerous enough on the ground. Unless the actual, it would be possible if the in-flight transitions were all automated and a person was not able to take control of a car in flight, but that is not what people want, or not what people's idea of a flying car is, so they won't accept it. If it's like, if a flying car had been called a flying taxi from the very beginning, I think it would be a lot easier for people to get into something like that and cede control to an automated entity. But because it's a notion of an automobile that we have identified as something that has a pilot or a driver, it's gonna be damn near impossible for anybody who grew up with the concept of cars being piloted to switch over to a pilotless taxi, let alone a flying ride in which nobody is the driver. And it's like the latter in terms of like not having a driver is really the only way flying cars would be possible, and not have fucking constant shit going into buildings. Whether on accident or on purpose. Because it's like distracted drivers run into buildings on the ground. Let's not put a distracted pilot up in the air trying to run to the grocery store and they fucking can't not text their kid or some shit, and they're, 300 feet in the air and texting while flying. So,
yeah, that's not gonna
as
happen.
somebody who wanted a flying car as a kid, the entire premise of like regular people operating those things is just so utterly absurd to me as an adult that I'm like, man, this really was some stupid kid cartoon shit. The idea, like,
I mean, just seeing the way a lot of people drive, the idea of them flying a plane is terrifying. Although I wonder if somebody was flying and they came upon somebody who was traveling slower than them, would they just get right behind them, or would they just go around them?
That notion of like traffic in the skies is like,
I mean, there are flight lanes.
Of course. But what I'm getting at is the way that they presented flying cars. They just took traffic on the ground and translated it into traffic in the air, as if there was no other ways to fly. Like, oh, everybody flies in this single lane. Like, yeah, when you're landing, everybody damn near takes the exact same flight path. But when you're not in the same, like, when you're not about to land a plane, they strategically put the flight paths separately in different altitudes and different trajectories so that you don't get near misses, let alone having somebody like following directly behind somebody. And that's where I mean, like, the ways that flying cars were conceived and presented as science fiction, it was poorly conceived of. And it's like they took all the worst things about road traffic and implemented them in the way that they portrayed flying car traffic. Like The Fifth Element, that's fucking stupid. It's really fucking stupid, the way flying cars are used in that film. But when you're a kid, it's cool.
Well, they did it in Star Wars too.
And oh yeah.
It's like, I think it's
almost every implementation of flying cars is fucking dumb. And that's where I mean, like, as an adult, I feel bad for my dumb kid self for ever thinking the way that they were doing it was cool. Not that I was like, oh, George Jetson's the coolest thing. But the way that the George Jetson flying car was presented, it didn't seem that dumb as a kid. It seemed like futuristic and it seemed advanced. But now as an adult, I'm like, not only is that regressive, that's like just dumb. It's fucking stupid. The way that they made the city restricted on these lanes. So that's the entire reason you would take George Jetson out of the equation. George Jetson shouldn't have been fucking piloting. It should have been an automated. And I know he could give it up and it would become automated.
Okay, and we're back. Sorry about that. A little bit of technical difficulties. Yeah, the Star Trek Bridge Crew game, that just made me kind of dizzy because there's so much going on.
Is it working?
Yep.
Okay.
But yeah, you know, what was it? Yeah, like, you know, the bridge crew game just it made me dizzy because there's just so much going on. And you were like jumping from station to station.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things about that experience that stood out to me was like piloting a spaceship is it's in 3 dimensions, so the controls are not remotely what one would think about in terms of like when you're driving, you're actually only using 2 planes in general. And it's like when you add in a vertical, like an extremely vertical mobility, there's this element of like, how does that translate into controls. And it's like, on the one hand, like a flight stick or a yoke seems like it might be preferable, but it still doesn't actually get the planes like. There'd be a lot of maneuvers that would be very difficult to execute with like a flight stick or a yoke that the layout in the Star Trek bridge like compensates for, in terms of you're given a trajectory and then a speed, like a throttle, but the trajectory is presented on a two-dimensional surface. So you're basically using one finger to map your trajectory and the other finger to control the throttle. And that's where that particular control mechanism, it probably wouldn't work for like a car, and it'd be really difficult to use on a plane. But for a spaceship, once you get used to it, it actually feels like one of the most intuitive means of controlling something that big. And I look at like a barge or a gigantic boat. They use wheels in many cases where, because the motion is the movement of a ship is obviously not the same as a car, but the way that it moves is still mostly in two planes, but then there's this element of like having to keep the ship upright in its motion. I would imagine it's closer to what flying or piloting a spaceship is like. But because there is an up and a down, it adds this level of like the wheel becomes more appropriate because that's
a really interesting analogy, because like the water has a consistent density and surface tension, but because of the wave action itself, any input into the wave is either absorbed or amplified by the wave. And so similarly with space and like Star Trek, where space travel, there is the whole portion of it where it's, impulse speed, but that's not how they get around. They get around by warping the fabric of space-time, which we know has varying densities. And so in a lot of ways, there's a lot to it that is analogous to traveling through water. And then there's a point where, Newtonian physics breaks down and it can't explain wormholes. Imagine diving into the water and then popping out of the other side of the lake.
Well, and it's just the notion of having an orientation of down and up makes navigation much more restricted into the way that one can move when there's an orientation is way more restricted. And I think that's why, like, when you get the sensation of actually flying the Enterprise, you want to orient up and down, but then that makes you pilot incorrectly. And only once you can like release yourself from that orientation can you actually really use the controls correctly.
Nobody talks about the Easter egg transporter function, preserve relative position. Because if you happen to beam to the bottom side of a planet, you might be upside down when you materialize.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I wonder. I mean, obviously, a teleporter should compensate for the rotation of the planet. I wonder if there were any like early transporter mistakes where somebody was like beaming something somewhere and it materializes partially inside of a structure.
Yeah, they've done that in a couple episodes actually.
Oh, okay.
At least one. I don't remember the specific episode.
I feel like
I know it's happened.
That can be like an entire episode about like the history of transporters. Like star date 26 or 2043, we had our first serious transporter injury. You know, someone stands too close to the transporter pad and then a box materializes like at the end of their finger. That's why home transporters are a no-go. Be like more dangerous than a microwave. They don't need microwaves in Star Trek Future though. That'd be like a quaint legacy technology that everyone knew was really dangerous, and they wondered why it took so long for the scientists of our time to figure out a better solution.
Well, that's where the replicator can do things to specific temperature requests too.
Oh yeah.
Because then that will start malfunctioning, and Picard's coffee or his Earl Grey won't be hot.
Yeah, he has to tell the computer like a specific temperature. But that's really cool. If you're gonna dial in your menu, be really specific.
Well, and that was another interesting part is in terms of like, yeah, they had to program all of the menus. So like, they would acquire new recipes as part of like
cultural exchange.
Yeah. And program that shit into the replicators where it's like every replicator didn't have access to every database. And the ones on the individual ships had to still get the recipes programmed in.
Man, that makes me wonder, like, I bet there were some ships out there that did not have very good menus at all because they just weren't updating their menu options. They didn't have anybody who was like really keen on, it's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna add this weird Tholian dessert, or actually it would be Tholians, they're like crystalline Bolian dessert. Yeah, there we go. Or Ryzen cakes. Ryzen cake sounds good, actually.
Yeah, I'm surprised they never did a Ryza spinoff of all things.
Ryza, ooh.
Gotten so many spinoffs.
Ryza would be a good spinoff too. It could be like the real world of Star Trek.
Yeah, I feel like Ryza would have been better than Deep Space Nine, or at least less depressing. Because in terms of
resort planet, what could go wrong on a resort planet? Oh,
fucking Worf shows up. That's what could go wrong. Worf couldn't stand people having fun,
so he made the place horrible.
Yeah, it ruined the weather modifiers. That was a funny one.
On some level, like he gets away with it because they just want everyone to have their vacation come to fruition. They want everyone to actualize what they need to relax on Ryza. And if that means destabilizing the local weather control system and upending government restrictions on whatever, then that's what it takes.
Well, with that episode, it made it seem like there was like a local population that was being colonized effectively. Whereas some of the people obviously went along with it, but it made me wonder if the episode was about like Hawaii or something in terms of when you have basically the Imperial Army using that place as their vacation spot, but the locals aren't really down with it, then it's like, who's right? Because the dude who wanted to destabilize Ryza and get, make people realize that they were, what was it, too complacent, and they actually, that's what it was. They had real problems to deal with, but because they were vacationing all the time, they weren't preparing for like real issues that would affect them. So it's like, on the one hand, dude's right. But on the other hand, then it's like, how much of the local population agreed with him, but versus how many wanted Ryza to be like the place for Starfleet. So it's like, I don't know for sure if they intended the plot to be that allegorical, but they've done it before in terms of like that the Maquis that Picard had to relocate after they had been relocated the first time. Or I think they're Maquis.
Oh no, that was the Indian.
Yeah.
No, that was like a whole Cardassian traveler Wesley episode, wasn't it?
Right, but I think that's like the start of the Maquis, if I'm not mistaken.
The Maquis were like stationed near Deep Space Nine.
Right. I mean, in terms of that's later, but I think what initially started, I don't know if it's the same group.
No, because I know there's that was the episode where they officially wrote Wesley out of the story.
For sure. Yeah, they definitely there's that definitely, but I think they retrofit that into the Maquis.
Well, that would make sense. I'm saying.
Because it's like, I think I know they tied Cisco to Locutus, and in terms of like the whole reason Cisco's origin story is based around Locutus is because they created this antagonism between Cisco and Picard. And they were trying to like establish connections between characters and between the storylines that were happening, which is like, I'd have to go back and rewatch it, but I want to say I think it happens in the like the crawl, the on-screen crawl for Voyager. In the like very first episode, that it's like retrofit. Like I said, I could be wrong, but I think the whole point of like, well, it wasn't the point at the time, but in terms of Picard basically letting that group be subject to the Cardassian control and wanting them to move again. I think that was what, like I said, I may be misremembering, but I think that they retrofit that to be what caused the Maquis to split off from the Federation in the first place. But I just may be conflating.
Let's see, it's called Journey's End, season 7, episode 20. Wow, that's like the end of the show. They only had a few more episodes before.
Because they were not being subtle about the imperialist aspects. That was very much the like, the origins can be traced to the Cardassian War.
Yeah, I'm not seeing Maquis though. I think the Maquis come from something else. They're like humans that got just like a.
Well, Cisco, like the guy that fought back against Cisco, was the actual start, like official in the universe. Because there was like, the dude from fucking Revenge of the Nerds, Tri-Lambda. He's like, he's like Cisco's friend turned antagonist. in the Maquis Part 2. Yeah, it's in Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, like the Cardassians were introduced in like one of the first episodes with when they introduced the changeling, when they all get dragged to the same planet, and then there's a changeling that's like, we seeded you from blah blah blah.
Well, they introduce certain things and then they'll change it retroactively. So, for example, the Ferengi were supposed to be much more violent and antagonistic at the beginning.
They were just too amusing. Couldn't take them seriously.
And nobody could take them seriously, so they like retrofit or retconned the culture.
And then when what was his name? When Quark had to defend his honor to keep his wife and not be slain by her bodyguard or whatever, Worf piloted a special suit of armor so that he could defeat.
Oh yeah, and he took control.
That was like what's it? What's that story? But it's like the guy who's feeding the lions. Ah, crap! I can't remember the name now. Cyrano de Bergerac. That's it. He's like feeding. Worf was feeding Quark lines to win the affections of this woman that he wanted to have like a. He just wanted to live and like get through a divorce with, and Worf was like madly in love with her because he'd never seen a woman so, powerful or whatever he says. That's a really fun episode. Yeah, Quark could never defeat a Klingon in like actual combat. Although I can see, Quark is probably good for a heist because he's really conniving and he's got a really giant brain. There should have been more heist episodes on DS9.
Yeah, so all that said, the colonies in Next Generation are representative of the original Maquis colonies that got seeded.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So they do tie it all together. It's just very convoluted.
That's kind of strange because that the Native Americans that were being displaced, they disappear with Wesley and the Traveler. They like evaporate into space dust. Not even space dust. They just disappeared.
Kind of. I think that's what happens in.
That's what happens in the TNG episode.
In the TNG, but I think that's where what Chakotay's history is trying to reference is that.
Okay.
Because he's got a very native upbringing in the lore, but I think it's actually with the Maquis on a colony.
Sisko doesn't like Picard because his wife died in the Battle of Wolf 359.
Right, with Locutus. That's where they tied Sisko to Picard with Locutus.
Everyone hates Picard because of Wolf 359.
Yeah.
Everyone. He destroyed the entire fleet. Like literally almost destroyed all of Starfleet in one battle. That's like,
Sisko is one of the only people to be openly antagonistic with him who's part of Starfleet.
Yeah.
Him and Sisko did not get along.
Yeah.
Which was cool to see in terms of, I think that was one of the first real times you got to see infighting in Starfleet. But the Sisko Picard antagonism was a really good storyline. Like it gave Sisko a lot of motivation.
Well, it's nice to know that Picard isn't like the glowing, figurehead that we want him to be. Is that he actually has some people that think less highly of him and are vocal about it. It's good. That means there's more depth to the character. If everyone liked Picard, he wouldn't be that interesting.
But that they even added to that with his, what was it, the Stargazer.
Oh yeah.
Because it was like that episode where a Ferengi plants a mind control device or some shit, and it's like there's a ton of bad shit that got covered up in Starfleet, but they were shown as the audience later. Because then it was like Riker's commander covered up some shit too.
Well, they completely covered up the transporter incident that created his clone.
Well, the transport incident and the cloak. They had
the cloak too. Well, the transporter incident is funny to me because they fabricate an entire identity for Will
Thomas
Riker. That's right, Thomas. William Thomas. Yeah. So they completely fabricated an entire identity to cover up the fact that they botched a transporter. There was a transporter incident, and they left a human being stuck in a freaking research facility for how long? And he didn't go crazy. I mean, he lost his shit.
Oh yeah,
but he wasn't he didn't go licking windows and chewing on wires crazy. He was still able to communicate. Man, that's actually a testament for the resilience of the William Riker genetic line. Is that they might actually be one of the few types of humans that can withstand being completely alone.
Well, and they imply this in terms of I think neither one wanted to reconcile with their dad, even though one is a fucking clone. Or an accident. He's not a clone, he's an accident.
Clone accident, same thing.
But he carried the resentment towards his father and in his genes. So it's
oh, that's so fucked up.
Riker's a very stubborn person down to the DNA.
It's like they took all the best things from Kirk and then tried to make the character more complicated without making overtly chauvinistic. Will Riker is pretty good about all things. I think he's just as pansexual as Kirk.
Well, they gave him the androgynous partner, and what was clearly a woman, where they tried to make it seem like the species had no.
Oh yeah, that's right.
No sexes.
Yeah. Man,
Riker was progressive.
I wonder. I bet that's the standard. Actually, we just don't. Get to see it
remember
they
wore the skirts.
That's right. There were dudes wearing skirts in during the pilot episode in the first season.
That's I think they brought them back in season 3 briefly. Oh, they put pants underneath them. That's what it was.
Pants skirts.
They became the official formal wear, but they put pants underneath them. But at one point, the skirt was unisex.
Man, even the future caves to the whims of the past. It's the 24th century. Why can't I find a skirt that fits right? Thank our 21st century progenitors.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos shows produced live in Sunroom Studios' Bass Capsule. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.